rejected the armed dimension of neutrality. The second way in which it departed from this model was that Austria very early on joined the United Nations in 1955, so the same year it adopted neutrality. And later in 1995, it joined the European Union. And in other terms, this means that Austria joined two communities of solidarity. And so from the very beginning of Austrian neutrality, there was this tension between being neutral and being embedded in a community of solidarity. First the UN and then later the European Union.
So were there different sort of phases
Yes.
or eras that you went through? Because like Ireland, there was a particular... were there particular eras or phases that neutrality went through? Because like Ireland, there was a particular context for our neutrality when we laid claim to it.
Absolutely. So first of all, during the Cold War, Austria was really trying to develop its neutrality. And this meant that it understood neutrality as a mandate, as an obligation also to contribute to the functioning of international society. Then, when it started to approach the European Union, it recalibrated neutrality and basically decreased this international focus, if you will. And then later on, we see a very important phase, which I call the depoliticization of neutrality. So roughly around the turn of the millennium, basically neutrality in Austria disappeared from public debate. And this is something that still basically is a problem to this very day for Austria.
So in practical terms, what does neutrality actually require in your country? What does it mandate? What does it include and exclude?
No foreign military bases, no support of other countries in wars, so that the classical elements that you can see also in international law. However, the thing is that Austria, after acceding or joining the European Union, basically added one further constitutional law that allows it to participate in the common foreign security policy of the European Union. So this means that essentially, when it comes to European things, as long as there is a mandate, it has basically derogated neutrality if it wants to. So that the legal framework is there, but it's at the end of the day a political decision whether Austria wants to participate in activities or not.
Yeah, I might turn you to Conor. Like obviously neutrality has, as we said, been sort of a totemic issue and a real sort of pillar of our national identity, or so we say. Because whilst we were one of the 5 surviving neutral countries after the Second World War, were we, and it's a big question, it all comes up, were we really, really neutral, or was it, as Lee said, neutral for the power that potentially threatened us the most?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say in the Second World War...
Yeah,
sorry, of course. In the Second World War, we were neutral on the side of the Allies, and I'm sure lots of people are familiar with the assistance given by Black Sad Lighthouse to the D-Day landings and things like that, but people probably don't, or many people probably aren't aware of all the other kind of hidden type of assistance we gave, primarily through intelligence. Ireland's military intelligence services basically acted as one with Allied intelligence services in passing on information, not just weather information, but information on German espionage attempts and that sort of thing. To the extent that Ireland had actually detected every German spy that landed in the country during World War II, or the emergency as we call it, and this information was passed on. It also, I should say, detected every American spy who was landed in the country, but it just let them do what they want, whereas the Germans were kept close tabs on.
But it was our domestic politics that was shaping that neutral or quasi-neutral stance at the time.
Oh yes, very much so. I mean, De Valera wasn't so much worried about an invasion by Germany or the UK, both of which were, especially by the UK, realistic propositions at one stage or another. He was probably most worried by the potential for civil war in the country. Like the IRA was dormant in some ways, but entering the war on one side would have certainly given them a boost in popularity and might have triggered a low-scale civil war. which Germany might have attempted and indeed did attempt to influence. So for De Valera, there was domestic security considerations as well as international security considerations, and the domestic were just as important as the international ones.
And the Book of Condolence, for Hitler, I know that's been exposed as a bit of a myth, but again, that stance on kind of sympathising as a head of state, again, was that being shaped by domestic as opposed to international considerations?
There's a lot of explanations, a lot of excuses about the incident where De Valera visited Herr Hempel in the German legation and signed the Book of Condolences. Some people say he visited Hempel's house, trying to downplay it as a personal visit with Hempel, who he was quite friendly with. That's not the case. It was an official visit, and it's not a myth to say that, yes, he did go and sign a Book of Condolences for Adolf Hitler, and there's no way of dressing that up. And indeed, it's one of the few black marks, I think, against De Valera at the end of a remarkably successful diplomatic campaign to keep Ireland neutral and to walk that tightrope. Why he did it, there's various explanations that have been put on the record. The most compelling one I found was that he wasn't going to be bullied by Britain into not doing this. He wanted to show Ireland's independence at a time when the world order was being restructured. He saw it as an opportunity to further differentiate Ireland from Britain in this new world order. But again, we have to put that against the fact that we all know about Churchill's offers to Ireland to if they come on board, in a very simplified version, if they come on board, we'll talk about the 6 counties. De Valera didn't reject that offer on the basis of a commitment to neutrality. He rejected that offer because at the time it looked like Britain was going to lose the war. It was a very, very practical thing. And he also rejected the offer, and it was probably a wise idea, on the basis that there was nothing in writing, and the Northern Ireland Stormont weren't on board with it. So even if they did win the war, it was probably quite unlikely that it was going to come to pass.
Has it always been a practical interpretation of neutrality? I was saying to Martin and Conor, I was involved for a large part of the pandemic with a local group that was restoring Hoth Air 6, which is one of the, I think, 81 signs around the Irish coastline at the time. And they were an expression of please don't bomb us, and an expression of our neutrality, until the then US ambassador said you wouldn't ever mind putting numbers on the top of them. They're very proud having restored number 6. But again, a kind of an Irish form of neutrality, because once they did that, they became navigational
markers,
aids and markers in their own right. So was it always a practical approach in those early days?
Very much so, a practical approach. When I was researching the book, one of my favourite kind of bits of research was going out to Baldonnel Airdrome. And in Baldonnel Airdrome, there was a big, huge ashtray, which was made out of a very large bomb that she dropped from an aeroplane. And this was gifted to the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces by an American general for a very specific reason, because during the war, the Irish Defence Forces flew senior American officers around the coast of Ireland to help them map the coast of Ireland. And those air signs were a key part of that. Yeah. They numbered them, but they also shared the locations of them. So they were, to the ordinary man of the street, a way of signifying we're neutral, don't bob us. But they were also, if you were an American bomber who was lost and you saw them, you knew exactly where they were by the number, as you said. So a very funny sort of neutrality, but I shouldn't overstate it as well, because during the first portion of the war, when before the US entered and when Britain was kind of standing alone, as they say, our neutrality or our support for Britain was much less full-throated, I'd say. There was intelligence cooperation between the two militaries, but the political support was much less forthcoming. And it's only really when the economic might of the US and the tide and the Hitler's decision to invade Russia or the Soviet Union, that the tide really began to turn, that we embraced that neutrality in favour of the Allies.
And just as I asked Martin, what is your understanding or your kind of, I suppose, insight into what our neutrality means in practice today, legally, practically, and do things like our use of Shannon make a mockery of that? Is it quite a an expandable version of things? You say it can be quite vague.
Yeah, well, it's vague, and it's vague by design. It is, the best description I've heard of it is it's whatever the government of the day need it to be. As we know, unlike Austria, it's not in the constitution. There is a provision inserted post-Lisbon that we can't join a European common defence organisation without a referendum, but there's nothing in there in relation to NATO, and so it's vague, it's elastic, it has changed significantly over the years, and we're currently in a process of it changing again. But in terms of the current government policy, they call it military neutrality, and they attach a very specific meaning to it. That is that we don't join a collective defence organisation, and the only one of those in the neighbourhood is NATO. So it essentially means not being in NATO.
And Martin, sometimes these things are a question of degree as much as kind. Obviously, Austria has its neutrality, but an interesting debate came up. Speaking of demining in the maritime field, but an interesting question came up when Ukraine was requiring assistance from countries, including Austria, around assistance in demining, which might be seen as a humanitarian act, but in another context, or depending on the circumstances, could actually bring it into a different one.
Yeah, this demining issue really showed that Austria has also a lot of difficulty in debating these things. In Austria, there was this debate about whether Austria could give humanitarian demining assistance to Ukraine. And there was a huge outcry, no, it shouldn't, because it's a violation of neutrality. Others said, well, it's basically what neutral countries do. They support other countries in need in terms of humanitarian assistance. But like I said, it really showed that there's not really much debate culture on security matters, on neutrality. And I think this is one of the key problems that we are facing now at the moment.
Yeah, because it's interesting, I think your former chancellor was at Nehemar, if I can pronounce it right, in 2022 said that the political debate over Austria's status was over and seemed or appeared to be trying to ending any discussion before it started. But then last year, most of the parliamentary parties, if not all of them, agreed that there should be an honest discussion about the future of neutrality. And I'm wondering, in that honest discussion, who is ahead, who is behind? Is the public or civil society at odds with politicians? Do they find comfort in standing behind neutrality, perhaps not to have to discuss issues like defence and defence spending? Where does that honest political debate sit?
Well, so it's really, so ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, or since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, civil society actors have pushed for a debate on neutrality. But first, the reaction by political parties was either very muted or outright negative, like Chancellor Nehammer. And this hasn't changed that much. So there is some say, well, we should debate, but there hasn't really been a debate. And this has also something to do with the position that the far-right party, the Austrian Freedom Party, has in this whole game, because they have used this depoliticization, this absence of the debates about neutrality, to position themselves as the guardian of neutrality, as the custodian of Austrian neutrality. And they have a very distinct interpretation of neutrality. I can talk about this if you want. And so the problem is that whenever another political party moves on the topic, the Freedom Party says, you are basically abandoning neutrality. And so the political parties are really like in this tricky situation that there is one party that is basically owning the issue. You have a population that is very much in support of neutrality, and whenever the other parties want to move and want to initiate the debate, the Freedom Party basically says, well, you want to abandon neutrality. And then, at the end of the day, this will cost votes. And so the political parties shy away from it. Yeah,
there's some echoes of what's happening in Austria, Conor, that could be said to be happening here today, because we are very, very proud, and I think justifiably proud of the fact that Ireland has always asserted that our contribution to global peace comes about not through military might, and it is through our peacekeeping, it's our diplomacy, and it's that moral force, I think President Michael D. Higgins had described it, of consistent non-alignment. And obviously recent opinion polls reflect very strong opinion for that stance. Sometimes it reminds me about the debate about unity. Very, very strong public opinion until you get into the real detail of it. But does it serve? Look, I mean, politically, do governments, do they utilise our strong attachment to neutrality as a convenient cloak for not talking about the strategic realities that we're facing when it comes to defence? Our maritime mass is 7 times bigger than our land mass. Is shocking. Basically the last percentage of undersea cables are found off Irish waters, and you know that kind of complaint that Ireland is happy for the RAF and the British to protect us in the skies, but actually are we playing our part? I express no view on that, just to say that these are perhaps not too dissimilar from the kind of questions that citizens in Austria are contemplating.
Absolutely, and opposition parties in Ireland have for decades attacked the ruling party, whether it be Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or a coalition in more recent years, for abandoning neutrality or watering down neutrality. And I mean, that's come mostly from the left, but you know, if you go back maybe 15, 16 years, you will see Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, vehemently defending the triple lock and the need for the triple lock and accusing the government of trying to get rid of the triple lock while in opposition, obviously. And now he's the person, you know, spearheading legislation to get rid of the triple lock. So, yeah, neutrality has always been a stick to beat the government with for the opposition. And sometimes it has served the government well, and more specifically the finance ministries well, because it is an excuse not to invest in defence. Because, and I'm not sure if it is the same in Austria, but for a long time, we never had this concept of armed neutrality. That the thing, and in fairness, it's a logical position. The thing that offends Ireland is its geography on an island off an island at the edge of Europe. So
you were recently reporting on the boat that we were all sort of following around the Irish coast, you know, and just kind of, which really seemed to expose the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's different now. Everything's different now, especially with, you know, the fact that the country is entirely, or sorry, the economy is massively reliant on the undersea data cables, which you know, a huge amount of world trade is based, like, but even more so energy and interconnectors. So Ireland is massively reliant on gas, as we've seen with the huge increase in home heating prices. If the gas, and that'll be the case for 20 years, no matter how well we progress. If they are attacked, we are in serious trouble. And I mean, like, if there's a coordinated attack, even if it's not attributable or whatever, you know, potential.
And we saw when President Zelensky arrived in Dublin at his plane touchdown, and the unmanned drones, which weren't seen by any sonars, it was seen by
people
the naked eye,
by, as they call it, the Mark 1 eyeball, like, you know, because those ships don't have air search radar. Yeah. We used to have a ship with that, but we sent it to the scrap heap. So for a long time it was getting worse. We're maybe turning the corner now, but the government has long used it as an excuse not to invest in defence or even talk or think about defence. I mean, if you go back to you know, records from the 20s and 30s, you've government officials asking, you know, querying the purchase of every single bullet, you know. So that if the chief of staff of the Defence Forces is not the accounting officer for the Defence Forces. In fact, he's not even in charge of the Defence Forces. The chain of command goes from the commanders of the individual formations, so 1 brigade, 2 brigade, directly to the Secretary General, well, the Minister for Defence through the Secretary General. So it's always been the politicians directly controlling the military. There's many reasons for that, going back to the mutiny in 1920. Or the early 1920s, but yeah, it's an interesting system, to say the least, and unique.
I wanted to ask you both, are we fooling ourselves, countries like Ireland and Austria, that somehow because we are neutral, we are insulated from the type of geopolitical threats we are seeing cascade all around the world, and particularly at a time at the highest level of conflict since World War II? Are we fooling ourselves, Martin?
I'm doing a survey project in Austria, so we do like our service annually, so we can compare. And what we see is that people tend to see that things are changing, that the situation is becoming more dangerous, but they are not willing to basically contribute to the defense of their country. So we asked them, for example, so if you had to join the armed forces today, what would you like to do there? Combat training, civil protection, whatever. And combat training and these things were really very low. Most people want to go to some kind of civil protection service, which also has a logic, because Austria also has an alpine terrain, has many challenges in that regard. But this also tells you that although people see on the horizon things are changing and things are becoming more complicated and more dangerous, they're not willing to basically play a role, to contribute. So it's just still this, okay, let's wait and see mentality.
And we even saw that play out in France, where, you know, they were encouraging more people to kind of come forward, and parents kicking back and saying, not our children. Do we have something of that here, Conor, as well? Like, I mean, one of the things, again, that we're most proud of is that, you know, we had quite a significant reception compared to some countries, particularly after the outbreak of the Ukraine war, when we saw a lot of people coming here that we were able to take in as refugees, and we comforted ourselves with the fact that, well, look, we can't be involved in any lethal combat, so this is our response, this is how we react to that. But again, that whole question of lethal and non-lethal combat, what you have to go through to get people to actually serve in some of those armed forces. Do you think there's anything that you discern, a shift in public opinion that kind of says, well, look, we are in the European Union and we have to step up and play our part?
There has been a shift. It hasn't been a massive one. It hasn't been a sea change, certainly. Neutrality, broadly speaking, is a very popular policy, and there's no sign of that changing. But if you look at the opinion polls that ask, you know, more specific questions like, should we join NATO? Very much no. But should we join an EU defence force, or should, if a European country was EU country was invaded, should we help them militarily? The number tends to be north of 50 often. So there has been a shift. I suppose the biggest shift I've noticed is neutrality remains popular, but there is an increasing acknowledgement that we need to invest in defence and security and talk more about defence and security. That seems to be anecdotally the opinion of people, and I think it's reflected in opinion polls. And there was never any votes in military spending before. There may be now. It's still not an issue that comes up on the doorstep, according to politicians, you know. But you know, in a programme for government, I think we've seen it is becoming a bigger and bigger part, and we've seen a raft of reports and strategy documents released in the last few years. You know, their maritime security strategy, the Commission on the Defence Forces, endorsed by the government, which call for a transformation in Irish security policy, and even the comments from, you know, senior military leaders who would have been not allowed or quite reticent before to frame Ireland as, you know, having a military force. You know, I interviewed the new chief of staff late last year, and it was interesting. You know, I was asking about his priorities, and his priorities were defending the state. It wasn't peacekeeping. It wasn't humanitarian aid, although they're very important. It was, we're a military, we're an army, and a navy, a naval service, and an air corps, and our goal is to defend the state.
But it's one that relies on RAF jets to police its airspace and the Royal Navy to protect its waters in extremis. And I'm wondering, does that make a fiction out of our independence in security matters? Does that make it difficult for us to have conversations around it?
It makes it somewhat hypocritical, and the only reason that it is hypocritical is the government refused to discuss it or disclose it even. Lots of other countries rely on neighbours for assistance, including air policing and maritime surveillance, and there's often a quid pro quo there. We do it while, you know, denying that it happens. Now, there's maybe a change there. The recent maritime security strategy, you know, very explicitly mentions cooperation with France and the UK. We've signed recently a memorandums of understanding with both countries, which emphasise cooperation in the maritime
We're also going to be presiding over the European Council from July of this year, when, Martin, issues of public spending for Europe when it comes to defence is going to be one of the biggest topics. Where do you see that debate evolving at a European level?
You mean at the European level?
Yeah.
Well, I think after what happened in the recent months, it's pretty clear that Europe has to become more self-reliant. So I think that there is large consensus now on this topic, but the huge challenge will, of course, be how to implement this, because there are like many problems that we're facing, like things like moving military equipment across states with different legal frameworks that you have to adapt to. Basically also building up military equipment, so where you buy it, what you buy. So there are many questions, but at least, you know, I can see that the opinion is strongly moving towards a more self-reliant and strong European defense, also identity. And this at some point will become a challenge also for neutral states, because they will have to position themselves in this.
And how will Austria do that at that kind of nexus of the, you know, neutrality, defence? How do you think that they will navigate that, particularly when other European countries are looking to us saying perhaps this isn't something you can, don't use the word afford, but, you know, we're in a definitely different geopolitical reality than we have been in decades.
I mean, the legal framework is well established. So the legal framework for working together with European countries in the security and defense area, that's not the problem. The problem is the political debate about it. And this is where I see like the major issue that Austria and the political parties in Austria have not prepared the population for questions of European solidarity. And so, for example, if Russia attacks a country in the Baltics, and the European partners ask Austria and other countries for support, our population is not really prepared for this kind of scenario. And this is basically where political actors and also civil society should put a lot of energy into.
Is Ireland prepared, Conor?
For a Europe,
For that kind of a conversation, if there is a further incursion, if other European countries are attacked?
no, they are not. But then again, I'm not sure there's any EU country aside from maybe the Baltics and those directly bordering Russia who have thought deeply enough about what it would mean for European solidarity. I mean, a lot of
But they are thinking very deeply about
absolutely, because it's an existential matter for them. You know, a lot of people think Russia wouldn't launch a full-scale invasion of the EU. What they would do is perhaps invade a part of a Baltic state with a Russian majority or a Russian-speaking majority, and, you know, occupy it, and then watch Europe tear itself apart and watch NATO tear itself apart, as, you know, people argue.
They could also interfere with a country in the periphery. That's home to a lot of undersea cables that has vulnerabilities.
That's happening. And if you talk to people, politicians, and from those countries, from say Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland to an extent, they would say they're already at war, because this is a thing they face every day in terms of, and not just, you know, Russian missiles and drones entering their airspace, but sabotage attacks that are very hard to attribute, this grey zone hybrid warfare. Every election they have is massive irregularities. I mean, look at Hungary right now, where you have basically the whole Russian propaganda machine coming in to help Orban. So they're living this every day. They're much better at responding to it than us. They're much better at talking about it to us. But so we're obviously insulated from it geographically, but the new kind of nature of warfare means we can be hit, and we will be hit if it were to happen, even short of full-scale war. You know, I talked about the energy interconnectors. We've seen the HSE attack. We've seen the damage that caused. That was by a criminal group, but a criminal group that has deep links to the Kremlin. You know, so it's easy to see that happening again. And it's easy to see other types of interference as well. So, for example, in terms of the hybrid space, say if we were to have a border poll, you know, Russia doesn't care what the result of that poll is, but if it can use it to cause chaos and division within Ireland and Northern Ireland and the UK, it will absolutely exploit that by trying to influence both sides and injecting that disinformation into the space.
Can
I just add to this? So, in my view, one of the key problems that we have in neutral states, in particular in Austria, is that people have not really, so the population has not really understood that, okay, there's Russia, that is a major threat to the east, but then there's also the United States, which is essentially abandoning Europe or basically turning into a rival state. And that for people in neutral countries is something very new, because Austria has also benefited from the protection of the United States, even though it's neutral. And so this is something that really has to people have to be made aware of that, because many people hope, okay, once Trump is gone, things will go back to normal, which is not what will happen.
And that is something, Conor, isn't it? Just that that in the past, I might have thought that the threat was China or that it was Russia. Europe is going through a real reckoning because of its relationship, just the new geopolitical reality with the US. And of course, that puts Ireland in quite a unique position, although we seem to have survived the St. Patrick's Day encounter quite well earlier this week.
Yeah, it puts Ireland in a difficult position, perhaps not as difficult as the US's NATO allies. We've already seen reports of certain allies being reluctant to share intelligence with the US and vice versa. We're very much on the periphery of that. We get some NATO intelligence, but very limited amount. I suppose it does, perhaps will raise the question of, or maybe would put the NATO debate, as much as there is a debate, to bed to a certain extent. Is like, why would you want to join such a dysfunctional organisation, an organisation that seems to be on incredibly thin ice? I mean, as recently as this week, Trump basically saying, NATO's in big trouble unless you guys send ships to the Strait of Hormuz. So, I mean, it's great for Ireland to be able to sit those debates out. But if you lose that American protection, that is going to impact Ireland.
Can I ask you both just, because there could be arguments, well, look, are we talking ourselves into increased militarisation? And the more that Europe and other countries arm themselves, the more we risk escalating and increasing risk. And, is there a tension, Martin, between the strategic reality of the moment that we are in, or would it be a betrayal of the moral identity of countries such as Ireland and Austria to compromise their neutrality in this moment? An easy question for you.
Well, so I think Austria has made the decision to say we want to be part of this European project. And if this European project comes under attack, then Austria has the possibility to join forces with others. And this European project is a project of liberal values. And therefore, I think there is not any moral problem in joining others in protecting Europe. I don't see a problem there.
But, Conor, not as straightforward perhaps for Ireland, and people do, it's one of the things that they value, and the general public seems to value that kind of that moral identity of neutrality. Of course, it is trickier for us, but with the triple lock, if we want to deploy or add people, to these forces, it is a tougher conversation. Have we tied ourselves into knots on it at a time when there are many, many actors, and perhaps not all of them necessarily good actors, who are trying to walk us into a further militarisation?
Yeah, well, I don't think neutrality is an inherently moral position. I think it can be an immoral position. Personally, my own opinion, if an EU ally is attacked and we didn't help, I don't think that would be defensible at all. We're part of this project. We have benefited hugely from this project. It is, a project of liberal democracy, of, it's becoming increasingly rare in this world, and it worth defending. The triple lock was never a good idea. Triple lock has been around since the 1960s, I believe. It wasn't properly thought through when it was introduced. It only became known as the triple lock during the Lisbon debates, when the government kind of promoted it as this thing that'll stop any Ireland becoming part of, the dreaded EU army. But the triple lock limits us in massive ways, and this debate has been had many times. Even if you want to contribute to peacekeeping, it limits us in massive ways. So getting rid of the triple lock is, for me personally, an easy one, and it should have been done years ago.
Sorry, I didn't mean to smile there, but my late mother had some hearing problems, and when the Lisbon Treaty was being debated, she asked myself and my twin how we were getting on with the Lisbon Treaty. And every time I hear the Lisbon Treaty, I think of my poor lovely mother and the Lisbon Treaty, a totally different thing, Martin. But it's really interesting. Kind of assessing where the public debate is. At the weekend I was in Paris. I was a judge on a wonderful series called the Wolf Tone Debates, which is a series of debates that takes place between secondary school students in Ireland and in France, where they debate all of the big issues of the day. But there was a great debate between a group of 11 and 12-year-olds on national service and whether or not this should be done. Ferocious, very impassioned debates, as you can imagine, 11 and 12-year-olds. But my goodness, their arguments, Martin, really, as I was reflecting just on tonight, just thinking, it's these issues, it is what do we do when that moment is called? Can we afford to sit out? Can we afford not to pay up? Can we maintain this? Can we do perhaps, I don't know, does Switzerland does it best with both a very, very strongly armed or well resourced? It's not easy. And do you stand and keep your principles in the face of what could be an existential crisis for Europe?
I think so. Whenever I discuss this issue of neutrality and defense in Austria, also with kids in school, as I tell them, look, at the end of the day, it's pretty easy. So there are two ways you can defend yourself. You can do it entirely on your own, or you can do it together with others. If you want to defend yourself entirely on your own, then you have to invest heavily. Not like 2% of GDP, but heavily. And then you do it the Swiss way, or how the Swiss used to do it. But this costs a lot of money and means self-reliance, of course. Or you do it together with others. And this is basically the way Austria wanted to defend itself, together with others. And if you do it collectively, and Austria has, like I said, established constitutional law that it can participate, then you have an obligation to help others. So it cannot be, and it's morally and politically not defensible, that you say, okay, we want you to protect us, but we won't protect you. It doesn't work. And I think this is a pretty easy argument that even school kids can understand.
Yeah. What about the quality of our own public debate, Conor? Where is it at and where is it going in your view?
Yeah, I think it's changing and improving all the time. It used to be, as I said, quite one-dimensional, and it basically boiled down to sure who'd want to attack us, and that is still present in some areas. The other one you hear, which frustrates me slightly, is if Russia wanted to invade us, we wouldn't be able to do anything even if we invested loads in our defence forces and security. So why bother? I mean, that's I think a very infantile way of looking at it, because the reason you invest in defence is as an insurance policy. It's as a way of monitoring threats, so you're aware of them, so you can do something before they happen. It's also, in the last gasp of things, a deterrence. So if you look at going back to the World War II, okay, we had a couple of divisions in Ireland, the highest number of soldiers the country's ever had. If Germany was to invade, yes, they would have taken the country, but they would have lost a good few soldiers doing it, and that definitely factored into the maths of whatever general in Berlin at some stage. So you need a military for deterrence. You also need it to combat those hybrid threats that we discussed. So the fact that Ireland, we're coming up for a 110-year anniversary of the history of the state. Our naval service is barely 80 years old. For an island country, as you said, seven times maritime area as land area, to have a navy which in the late 60s didn't have any ships to put to sea, and in recent years didn't have any people to man the ships to put to sea. It's indefensible, and yes, we don't need a navy capable of sinking an aircraft carrier, but we do need a navy capable of at least knowing what's going on in our waters to protect the infrastructure, to protect this foreign domestic investment, which the economy unfortunately is so reliant on. Like, it's an economic imperative as much as it is a national security one.
NATO definitely a no.
Well, NATO wouldn't have us in the
I know,
current
but
state.
I mean, that idea of being aligned. It's just where it's too much of a jump to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I'd see alignment in a kind of a European collective defence arrangement, even though that would require specifically a referendum, as a much more palatable, likely to the Irish electorate. But NATO, especially NATO as it is now, as I said, it looks quite dysfunctional, and why would you want to?
And Martin, similarly, are there limits, do you think, to Austria's cooperation in defence, or do you think they've got into a space where they, as you say, they have that room for legal and moral manoeuvre if they need it?
Well, the NATO is not in the cards.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of survey that many surveys that tell us, well, NATO is definitely not in the cards. However, Austria is part of the Partnership for Peace program, so the Austrian armed forces are also orienting themselves toward NATO standards. And even the Swiss said that in the worst situation, they would hope that NATO would come and help them, which is legally not a problem because collective self-defense is not an issue. But that's definitely, so joining NATO, I think, is where people would not want to go in Austria.
And as Conor says, who would want to perhaps at the moment? We are going to open this debate up to the floor. Please put your hand up. I think we do have a mic, and if you could just let us know who you are and where you're from, and please direct your question to Conor and Martin. Really tough ones as well.
Thank you. Very, very, very interesting. My name is Nicolas Nio. I'm the ambassador of Belgium to Ireland. I would like to offer 2 comments and ask a question. 2 comments on neutrality. For me, neutrality is something that is really something that you choose. It's generally imposed by the circumstances. When Belgium was, breaking away from the Netherlands, the big powers in Europe said, "Okay, you might be independent, but you're gonna have to be neutral, right?" And I think in different circumstances, a bit what happened to Austria after World War II. It's not really something that you choose. Then the second thing, of course, you have to make sure you're credible. So the gentleman referred to Austria armed. Of course you have to be armed. You have to have capacities. Otherwise you're not credible. And in Belgium, we not only established conscription at the 19th century and started to create a whole line of forts. We wanted to make sure that the Germans and the French knew we were serious about it. And then I come to my second comment, is that neutrality is kind of a myth. It works until you're attacked. And the Germans ran over us twice. And after that, and no hard feelings towards the Germans, because we're friends now. But history told us that, okay, after that, we had no choice. I mean, what's the point of being neutral if they come over and over again? So we decided to be part of a cluster, part of an alliance. My question now is, and you alluded to that, it's okay, somehow you have to pay for your own defense, whether you're neutral or not. And nobody wants to spend money on it. Even in Belgium, for years, we thought after 1989, we don't need it, right? And second, anyway, the US is going to take care of us. And I think Mr. Trump at least has been very clear about something, and everybody had to wake up. So my question would be towards the Irish
Conor
here,
Yeah, exactly.
but also to the Irish population. What would happen if the UK would suddenly say, "There's no problem. We're going to keep doing it, but you're going to have to pick up the tab. You're going to have to pay for the price. We send you an invoice for all the things we do. Would it be politically acceptable?
Easy question for you there, Conor.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. It's interesting you bring it up because I was just looking through debates in the last couple of years in Westminster, and there's been an increasing number of, lords and people in opposition mainly saying, why are we defending Ireland for free? Why aren't we sending them a bill? And the minister or minister of state at the time, has said, "Oh, we work very closely with them." The fact is, they defend us because it helps defend themselves. The Western approaches to the UK, like we're in the Western approaches to them, so it makes sense for them to defend us. They, if a Russian bomber or a hijacked aircraft is coming over Ireland, it's probably more likely it's aiming for London, perhaps, than for Galway or Dublin. So in some ways it is in their interests, but there has been increased pressure, I think, and I don't know if you have detected this, but from both European EU allies and from the UK and America, there is a subtle but persistent diplomatic campaign. Even at the sidelines of the recent Munich Security Conference, that Ireland needs to start taking defence seriously, and you're also getting that from the private companies. So the communications giants, the people who have all these cables, they want that. They see themselves as entitled to that because they create jobs in Ireland and invest in Ireland. So that pressure from those two fronts, I think, is what is moving the dial a bit in terms of the Irish government. It is what is opening the spending tap in terms of the military. But there's only so much you can do in so little, in such a short period of time.
Yeah, but it's interesting, even around the rhetoric and unity and the subvention and pensions and everything. There's a lot of the conversation is changing. Ambassador, thank you very much. We have Liddy just in front of you.
Hello. Thank also for your explication. I am Teresa Lizarrazo, the Ambassador of Spain, so also NATO country. We're also debate on the spending in defence. It's not this year, it's quite public. But I think that you opened this debate saying that Ukraine has changed everything. Ukraine and the new concept of security, which is very broad. I was in Brussels working on the preparation of the Peace Facility Fund, which was a way to, it's not thought for Ukraine. I remember the debates of Nordic countries saying, no, we cannot buy lethal military equipment. We could not do that also for the African Peace Facility. Now, thank God, we created the Peace Facility Fund, and we've spent around 70,000 million for equipment. So that means that the EU budget is a common budget. And even if we forget that, it comes from member states, or like contributing countries like Ireland, Spain, or Belgium. So neutrality concept is shrinking or blurring. What I mean is that no matter how much the government is saying that they're just supporting Ukraine very much and very engaged, not only in sending humanitarian aid or support for the energy crisis, indirectly through the EU mechanisms, which are solidarity mechanisms, we have gone much further than we thought. And this is not part in the debate because, well, first, regular citizens do not have an idea what the peace facility is. But it's going to be a debate now because within the new multi-annual financial framework, the financing that is going to be allocated for security and defense is going to be much larger.
That's true,
so
Martin.
My question is, how do you foresee the debate here? Because in a way, it's even shrinking even more that traditional concept of neutrality. That's like the ambassador of Belgium said. It's only you want to be killed while you're not being attacked.
Because Conor, I think what the ambassador is really hinting at is that these issues are going to crystallise further and quite quickly. Not only during our own presidency, but as that multi-annual budget is confirmed, we mightn't be able to hide behind all of the niceties of, well, it's lethal, it's non-lethal, it is part of that overall funding.
Yeah, well, we will be able to hide behind that to an extent in terms of we have this non-lethal channel, which I presume Austria is part of as well, and Cyprus and Malta, where all of our money goes towards non-lethal things, humanitarian things, but it's still military equipment in a large part. So the EPF is actually one of the best illustrations of kind of the schizophrenic and elastic nature of Irish neutrality, because we're sending fuel, petrol. There's no one going with that petrol to make sure it's not going into a tank and it's only going into an ambulance, We're sending body armour. I mean, body armour protects bullets, but it protects bullets on soldiers who are shooting bullets at other people. We contribute towards demining in terms of equipment and training and personnel. But demining is also an intrinsic part of war. You need to take the mines out of a bit of land so you can attack down that land. So it is... Yeah, it's a funny one. It's a bit of a fig leaf, in my opinion, and doesn't get much attention. It hasn't caused much debate among the Irish public, the EPF thing. I think most people, if you ask them, would say they're broadly supportive of it.
They just might want to know the
exact
details, the direct versus the indirect. Time for a few more questions. This lady here, thank you.
I'm not an ambassador, I'm just a concerned Irish citizen. The question I wanted to ask is really around what should we be spending our money on in the defence space? Because I know there was a whole proposal around level of ambition 2 and really investing in the permanent defence forces and trying to bring up the salaries to attract more people in and to buy the equipment. But I just wanted to pick up on the Austrian speaker's point around civic participation and actually encouraging people to come into the defence forces, and what would they do if they had to do a year of service. And when I was in college 20 years ago, a lot of my friends were involved in the reserves in the FCA as it was known, and it seems that there was a great kind of willingness amongst young people to join the reserves and to participate and to learn and to do training. My own brother did it, and he then took those skills and now volunteers with the RNLI protecting the coastline around Waterford, which is wonderful to see. So I do think there's more benefit to joining the reserves than just being a reserve army. It's all these life skills that you get from it. So where should we be spending our money? Should we be trying to do level ambition 2, focusing on the permanent defence forces, or should we be trying to have that civic participation in defence forces training again like we had 20 years ago? Just kind of wondering strategically what should we be doing, and what would be the benefits or the negatives or positives of where we would choose.
Conor, where should we be spending our money?
Why not both? I mean, I think we need to be ambitious. I think it's a disgrace what has happened to the reserve. I do know lots of people who are in it. I like my Lions too much to ever go for it. But I think it has an establishment strength of roughly 4,000. About a quarter of that are actually active, and that's not because people don't want to join it. Actually, it's massively oversubscribed. The problem is they don't have enough people doing the medicals and doing the Garda vet and that sort of stuff to actually get them through the door. So a first step could be reopening those reserve formations in, those medium-sized towns around the country, making the defence forces more visible, creating a skill set, creating a career path for people who might want it into the defence forces, and also just giving people really important skills in life-saving, CPR, first aid, etc., etc. If in the very unlikely event we have a war, it's always good to have people with military training as well. So, but I think there is a plan now to rejuvenate the reserve. It's always been the poor sister of the defence forces, which is the poor sister of other government agencies. So it is low down the pecking order in terms of resources. But it does seem that numbers are going up, although for many people not fast enough.
Is there a big debate in Austria, Martin, about where should defence spending be increased and where should it be allocated? And is there any sense, do you think, you spoke earlier just about that debate about national service, that could you see that conversation changing if the military situation changes?
Well, so on average, people support more defense spending. Also, we have at the moment a debate about the length of military service. At the moment, we have 6 months of mandatory military service, and which is, 6 months is a joke. So I once spoke to a member of the Israeli Defense Forces. It might be an extreme case compared to Austria. And he asked me, okay, so how long is military service? I said 6 months, and he couldn't even understand what I was talking about, but yeah. So at the moment, there's a debate on how to move on, and people actually support longer service. So on average, they say, well, about 10 months to maybe even a year, they would support. But like I said before, the problem is that they have a very, very special kind of service in mind, which is not really military service that is needed. So yes, more money for the armed forces. Yes, longer military service,
But not that combat
but
stuff.
not that combat stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any more questions for us here? There are a gentleman here, and then so I'd like to hear for you. You've got the microphone in your hand. That means you go.
Yeah, so my question is more about what is the political strategy of ensuring debate within neutrality or even just defence spending within itself. 'Cause I think what we're seeing is when it does come up, it's a very divisive and almost ideological debate, and not so much about the actual practical nature of it. So yeah, my question is, I suppose, what strategy can we do in Ireland and Austria politically to get this debate actually?
Yeah, because I think, Martin, thank you very much. I think, Martin, you've already alluded to the sort of the gotcha element of it politically. When the issue comes up, it's used to kind of suppress the debate or push it in a certain manner, so it becomes binary and very politicised very quickly, perhaps without being substantive.
Absolutely. So I think there is, if you want to start the whole debate about security, and you started with a debate about neutrality, this is a trap. This will get you nowhere. And as far as I can see, also political decision makers in Austria have understood this, because they are now changing the course, which I think is a good decision, towards discussing security. So the question needs to be, what is threatening our security? And I think that's rather obvious these days. And then we need to talk about, okay, so how can we maintain security? And then along the way, we need to talk about neutrality, maybe not. But if we start with neutrality, it's just a trap.
Yeah. Conor, things that move me to tears include, but are not limited to, every time they show the troops coming home, whether it's at Christmas or they're coming home from a deployment, and you have this sort of emotional connection to seeing those people, and they've been in really, really difficult areas of the world. We sometimes think that peacekeeping is just keeping the peace, but it's a really, really tough stuff. And we have that sort of unbelievable connection to our defence forces when we see it, and then not so good then talking about the reality and about we're a small island economy. We're defenceless in many respects, but we're not good at having that national security conversation. And of course, I come from part of the island where it was very, very difficult. So perhaps I'm coming to it with a certain kind of experience, but it is a conversation that we need to have in the same way we need to talk about the economy and public health and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, and what they say about peacekeepers, and I'm probably butchering the quote, is it's not a job for soldiers, but it's a job only soldiers can do. And we have become, very comfortable and very proud, and rightly so, of our uninterrupted contribution to UN peacekeeping missions. But say we just want to continue down that road. Well, these missions are becoming increasingly dangerous. So even if you put aside national security, we need to invest in defence to actually ensure the soldiers that we're so proud of are actually protected abroad and have the equipment and training to do their job. But just going back to the debate, I suppose, the debate can be quite juvenile on both sides of the argument. It can either descend into, okay, if you're very pro-neutrality and against military spending, you might be called like a Russian stooge. And on the other side, if you're pro-military spending, you want children conscripted into a NATO army to die in a far-off battlefield. And then it often comes into, why are we spending, 60 million on sonar equipment when we have, the much more immediate housing and health crisis? Well, other countries manage to do it, with these crises. So, yeah, the debate is still evolving, but can be quite juvenile on both sides. How you address that is discussing more events like this. I mean, I've been campaigning in my place for, them to create a defence correspondent position rather than, for some reason, tacking it onto crime. And, that's what you see at RTE, even the national broadcaster. So we are quite stunted in terms of the debate here.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I was delighted to see when all the security correspondents went from the north, it was a positive sign. There was a gentleman here, I think. I'm going to take one final question before I invite Katrina to conclude for us.
Thanks very much. My name is Rory Rowan. I'm an assistant professor of geography at Trinity. And I think
Or you might just have to raise your voice. Yeah. If not, sure, you're a lecturer, you can just stand up and... Oh, yeah.
you want to try that one?
Yeah, why not?
Back to my usual place.
Yeah.
So my name's Rory Rowan. This feels very strange. I'm an assistant professor of geography in Trinity, and I think I've probably been called a Russian stooge at times, although I'm not a Russian stooge, I assure you. And I guess, I do want to say just quickly, I find it kind of funny that there is a distinction made between the ideological and the practical, as if the ideological... I think we shouldn't understand ideology just as like fluff or nonsense, but there's questions here of war and peace, national security. This is about values, identity, morality, things that have been raised, not just the concrete. And we need to obviously engage with both of those. So I think we shouldn't have that big divide. But my question, then, to be quick, is really to Conor, I guess, but maybe Martin has something to say to it too. And it's about the position of Ireland, not just in relationship to the EU, but also in relationship to the US. And so we have this discussion that Martin's raised about the growing division between the United States and Europe, not just the EU, but Europe more broadly, and where Ireland sits in that. Obviously we're very, very economically dependent on the United States, as has been raised. And we have this, obviously Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, has been in Washington and so on, obviously doing trade missions, not just diplomatic work, and trying to get investment into the country. Had a discussion of Amazon making further investments in data centres tied to the cables and so on that have been mentioned. So how do you see the position of Ireland going forward in this kind of increasing tension between the United States and Europe in terms of its position of its security? And will Ireland be faced with a very difficult choice about making economic decisions counter the kind of military and defence?
Boston or Berlin, once again, Conor Gallagher.
Absolutely, and it's a bit outside of my wheelhouse, I suppose, but even in terms of the headquartering of the social media companies here, and it's Boston or Berlin, we have increasingly strict and I think valid rules from the EU about content moderation, and then you've got massive pushback from the Trump administration. There are very big questions that will have really concrete economic effects for the country, and I don't know what way it will fall. It'll depend on who's in government, but certainly based on the recent activity, I think we'll try and continue ride two horses for as long as possible. But even going back to a defence type of thing, it's not just the Russian shadow fleet in our waters. The US operate naval vessels in our waters. They're there maintaining their underwater listening posts or whatever. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that they might become a threat. And so there is a need to be able to see what they're doing under the sea and what everyone else is doing under the sea, including our friends and neighbours, just as much as it is to see what Russia is doing there.
That's excellent. Thank you, Conor and Martin. Rather than try and sum up, I'm just going to steal the conclusion of the Belgian ambassador, who observed that neutrality is rarely a choice. It goes to a question of credibility, and perhaps it is a myth until we are attacked. I'm indebted to Conor Gallagher and to Dr. Martin Senn for providing us with a really rich conversation. It's been a privilege for me to facilitate it, and I'll hand back over to our Curator-in-Chief, Katrina Crowe.
Thanks, Derval, and thanks to our wonderful speakers tonight for this. I'm just going to recite a short rhyme from a wonderful play called Improbable Frequency, written about 15 years ago by Arthur Reardon, about what we called the emergency, as most of you will know. And it is it smugness or insurgency that makes them say emergency? It seems to lack the urgency of World War II. And one of our issues here is we escaped World War II because of De Valera's decision to choose neutrality, which was made for good reasons, but it's nothing to be proud of. When I was a younger person, I thought we actually opted out of fighting fascism. Now, of course, we didn't. We were neutral on the side of the Allies. We were sharing intelligence with GCHQ. But in 1940, when Britain was on its own, when America showed no signs of coming into the war, and luckily, well, unluckily, Pearl Harbor was a disaster, obviously, for the people involved in it. But America did get involved in the war. And we need to think about what the consequences might have been if they hadn't. Also, some of my heroes are the people who went and joined the RAF and other British services during World War II and helped to win, in particular, the Battle of Britain, which was a turning point in the war. We tend to be a little bit infantile about war, strangely, in this country, having watched what went on in Northern Ireland for 30 years and how utterly frightful it was. All you have to do is just look at the reports every day now from Iran. We've been looking at Gaza for a long time, and for Ukraine for a long time, to see what the consequences of fascist invasions of other countries are. And this is not something we can take lightly, or not something that we should say we opt out of. I am not saying we should abandon our neutrality. I'm saying we need to think about it in the way that our two speakers tonight have, which is about honestly looking at how we can morally deal with these situations, and if neutrality is so precious to it, how we maintain it in a way that doesn't actually make us morally questionable. Conor made the very important remark tonight that neutrality isn't a moral virtue. It's a strategic decision. And we have to remember that. There's nothing makes us morally better because we're neutral. As the Belgian ambassador told us, you have no choice if you're Belgium. You can't be neutral if the German tanks come rolling into your town. And that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at a very grim world at the moment. One of the things we haven't discussed tonight, and that is not being discussed really much, is nuclear war. The doomsday clock, which is set in Chatham House every year, is closer to midnight than it ever has been. There's all sorts of reasons to be very worried about what might happen in terms of the bad actors in the world who are in charge of vast nuclear arsenals and what they might do with it. So we have plenty to talk about. I think tonight was a wonderful discussion that made us think about all kinds of practical and ideological, and Rory's right, there doesn't need to be a gap between ideology and the practical reasons. But ideology, in a way, produces practicality. So your ideology has to be right before you can make decisions about what you're going to do in practical terms. So thank you all very much, but particularly I would like you to thank Conor and Martin and our wonderful moderator, Derval MacDonald, for the preparation that you put into this, and join us all for a glass of wine outside. Thank you.